Roland's JX-8p synthesizer is probably not considered to be as much of a classic as a synth like the Yamaha DX7. It was flawed in a number of ways, one of which was the difficulty of editing, again via a menu and small screen system, which made it nowhere near as immediate as its all analog, easy to control, grab lots of controls and move them around forebears. But that doesn't mean to say it isn't a useful synth. Fortunately for us, there is a free VST which is available for Mac and Windows, which allows you to get access to pretty much accurate emulations of those sounds for free. It's the PG-8X, and that's what we're looking at today. So here you can see the site of the creator of the PG-8X, and as you can see, there's a fair bit of information about it. And towards the bottom, there are download links for whatever format you'd need. It comes just as a plain DLL file, which you can install. If you don't know how to do that, check out the installation videos elsewhere on the channel in the how-to playlist. With many of these recreations of classic synths in software, it's useful to be able to access the sounds which were used back in the day. While the PG-8X is eminently programmable, it's nice to have access to these, and what's even more fortunate is that it actually reads and writes the Roland JX format Sysex, which means we can just download patches from the internet, from fan sites such as the one that you're seeing on screen at the moment, and then use these and load them up onto the synth and play with them. So here we've just got program write, load and save. So I'm going to click load, and that will take me to, in this case, I'm going to go to my downloads folder where I've got these, and we've got the factory sounds. Now, what's interesting about these is these are all the factory sounds. And if we load up ACK Guitar, we see that it's in program slot 5. And if I play it, it's, you know, that underwhelming acoustic guitar sound, but it gets put in that slot. If we load up another one, load up Bomb. So that's very useful for all those sort of white noise drops that you want to do. You can do it live, and rather than having to use samples, etc. And we can see that if we go back to program 5, ACK Guitar is there. So this actually has all of the preset sounds of the JX-8p. You just have to load them one at a time. Classic. That's what it started off as, program number 1. So after you've been looking at presets, of which there's many, say, particularly if you download from the link given in the description, you may want to start storing your own presets. Now, there's a number of ways you can do this. Firstly, you can rely on the fact that Cubase will save the current settings of the PG-8X exactly as it is. So let's say you've loaded up a few sounds. You've got number 1, poly brass. We've got 5 acoustic guitar, etc. If you leave it like that, so let's say we just left on acoustic guitar, save this program, it will be saved. You won't need to worry about it. However, you might want to get a little bit more into it, and if you do, we're just going to run through how you can do that. So let's go back to number 1, poly brass. Let's say we've made some changes to it. So here's the initial patch. We've decided that brass should be square waves because we've lost our minds. Or noise. There we go. That's clearly different, isn't it? Now, we can write it. Now, what you do, when you press the right button, you'll see this will say a W, and there'll be a 1 here. And here's where you've got to be really accurate with your mouse. So you click right. And if we click anywhere else, it will basically write it to this location, which we don't want. So I want to click here, just on the 1, and then I'm going to pick where I'm going to save it to, which is number 2. And now that's saved in number 2. With the noise, and if we go back to number 1, which is still named Polybrass 2, we've got that. So we can do that, and we can rename it. So naming the patch is straightforward. Just double click here and call it something else. And this time I'm going to write it here. So when this goes yellow, it shows you've made some changes. And we click right and click right again. And now that's saved. So that's saved in 2. There's that there. Now, while it is, of course, possible to noodle around and save things from within your project, so relying on Cubase for saving the VST's current settings, it's sometimes useful to be able to load these programs up. So let's say there was a particular sound on the PG-8X which you wanted to load up reliably from Cubase. You can do this, and you do this by clicking here and saving it as a preset. So here I'm going to call it PG-8X noise brass, because that's probably the easiest way to rely on that. Now, when I want to load this up in future, I will be able to do that pretty quickly. So I'm going to close that there. I'm going to make a new PG8. So let's just close the lower zone. I'm going to add a new PG8. And if I click here, we can see as soon as I click there, PG-8X noise brass, because it's relevant to this, is available. So the list of programs that you make will become bigger as you do them, and then you'll just be able to load them up. And it's loaded them up. Notice that it's put it on program 2 because that's how it was saved before, but that kind of doesn't matter, because unless you're going to change around, there's no need to worry about it. If we go back to program 1, notice that those will all be there. So you can use this, maybe if you find, I don't know, a few PG-8X sounds that you like, you can use this to load all of those in one go effectively, and then you can change between them, because if we go up to number 5, we see AC guitar is there, and if we went all the way up to 31, we would also see that bomb would be there, etc. So just by using some of Cubase's features, it makes it much easier to do this rather than having to go load those up from scratch every time. As with all of these synths, it's worth spending some time listening to the sounds which are in there, because obviously, you know, they may not be absolutely knockout, impressive Avenger style sounds, but there's some useful textures and sounds in here. But also, if you're at the beginning of your learning to program synth journey, it's really worthwhile breaking these patches down and working out how they sound the way that they do, because there's some useful synth programming tricks which the people who made these presets understood fully. And what you want with these kind of synths is to be able to hear a sound and be able to program it and get close to it. So when you hear a sound, you know roughly what kind of waveform it is, what kind of filtering's been applied, how it's changing over time. And this comes with practice, but also by effectively reverse engineering the presets that you find. So you'll find a sound that you like, and then realize what elements are in there, and then you can start applying those to your own programs. So there's a semi-useful function here of the randomization. So here we've just set it to random. The bonus is every time you do it, you get a different result. So that is an interesting sort of mosquito sound. And away we go again. Here, often you get kind of nothing. But if you want some interesting sounds to start with, or again, just to be able to work out what's going on, this is one thing to do. Obviously, a lot of them are just crazy wibbling sounds, but some of them will be useful and possibly even worthwhile and worth saving. So with the plugin installed, you can see it here on screen, and as ever, I've got supervision running on the right-hand side of the screen so we can see the kind of waveforms that it outputs. So here we have the initial patch, which is just a straightforward saw wave, but it's actually pretty useful because it means you can just take a quick tour. You've got different waveforms, pulse, square wave, and you can see the curves on the square wave on screen pretty clearly. And that's why it doesn't sound the same as maybe a square wave from another synth. And then we've also got noise. Okay, the range controls, as is tradition at this era, is done in terms of feet because those relate to the pipes on an organ. So we've got etc. So that's how your tuning is done. And that, in case you didn't know, that's why they are measured in feet. We've got some tuning. in semitones as well. And we've got the LFO control and the envelope control, both of which are going to control the oscillator's pitch. So if we turn the LFO control up, we can hear and see the pitch changing. And at the moment, the LFO is really slow. So I'm just going to turn that up so we get a bit more of an effect from it. And there you can see that working. And we'll just take less of that in there. We can also have the envelope affecting the pitch. And this is pretty flexible because it can do it in a positive way or a negative way, as you can see there. And it can come from envelope 1 or envelope 2. So at the moment, it's in envelope 1 up. So if I put this here, you can hear that. You can hear it when it releases, so that's... If I bring that down. So I'm playing the same key, and as I bring the key in, you can hear the positive effect. So the envelope is taking it all the way up to that pitch, and if we slow this time down... And it's already sounding like those kind of classic Space Invader synth sounds, etc. So with just a bit of playing around, you can get some pretty interesting sounds out of this. Dynamics also can affect this, so if I put it onto Dynamics 3 and hit harder, you can hear the pitch changing. So if I hit really hard, if I hit gently, it's a lower pitch, etc. So you've got some ability to control this, and obviously the mount, you probably wouldn't want it that extreme. We've got much the same in DCO2, but we've also got the ability to do fine-tuning and the cross-modulation. So this allows these two to effectively DCO2 to be controlled by DCO1. So let's turn DCO2 up. We can hear that in there now. And if we turn the cross modulation on, so I'll put them on the same. And with it in 1, it's synced. So even if we change this tuning, we get these interesting squared off waveforms because it's being reset every time DCO1 cycles again. So the pitch stays the same, but all the harmonic balance changes. With 2, it's synced and ring modulated. So we get a different effect as I sweep the tune control. And then in 3, it's just ring modulated. So you're hearing some difference between the two frequencies. So you can hear those kind of... And if we get them the same, it's going to be much closer. But yeah, there's again quite a few sounds. I never have that much fun with ring modulated sounds, to be honest. But syncing, it really works well. So when they're hard synced, you can get all sorts of changes and get some just sound balances and harmonic balances you wouldn't be able to get otherwise. And obviously, you can change these waveforms, change the pitch of them. And you get different effects with that. You can see that working differently, whereas when it's on 2 foot, we're getting a different effect in there. So there's plenty to be done there. Obviously, you can just offset them, fatten things up, etc., that kind of thing. So just playing around with the oscillators, there's plenty to do. So the mixer initially seems pretty straightforward. We've got DCO1 and DCO2 volumes, which we can control the balance. So I'll just make sure they're on different sounds so it's clear which one's which. So we've got DCO1 and DCO2. But the envelope control here is in line with DCO2 for a reason, and that's because it can control the volume of DCO2. So if I bring this down, we're not going to hear any of that, but then we can use the envelope to bring this in depending on the settings currently of envelope 1. But again, we've got this flexibility of setting it to plus or minus 1 or 2. So I'm just going to leave it on envelope 1. We've got some attack time dialed in there. And now if I put this here, this is going to fade DCO2 in. So we'll start out with just that, and then that will fade in. So you can hear that coming in. I can make that take longer. So you can control the sonic balance between the two by controlling how long it takes DCO2 to come in. And you can do it in reverse mode effectively. So if we turn this up and then make that subtractive, so then that's going to fade that out. So you can hear that. We're just getting that initial blast of DCO2, and then the negative envelope set here is then removing that. So that works pretty flexibly and gives us something you don't see on every synth. Next up, the filters. So I wouldn't say that the filter of the PG-8X is exactly a classic. It's okay, but it's not, you know, incredible. So it doesn't give us a huge range of options, which is pretty much in line with the JX-8p. And I can't really testify as to whether the sound of it is as good as a real 8p, etc. But it's not a really amazing filter, but it's okay. So let's just set up a sound with some real harmonics as we've got here. So we've got a couple of square waves, different octaves, etc. And then let's play around with this. So if we bring the cutoff frequency down, we can hear that's working okay, and we can bring a bit of resonance up. And you can hear, because we've only got 100 settings here, we can hear the stepping in this, you know, particularly around this sort of sweet spot here. You hear one of the limitations of this kind of thing, that you can hear those different frequency changes. They're not super smooth. So it's the kind of thing, if you've got envelope control of it, as we're going to see, then that will be smooth. But doing this manually, in this case using the controls, sometimes you can hear a bit of sort of staircasing through those different settings. Now, fortunately, we've got the ability to add the LFO to the filter or envelope control, and also have variable key follow. So let's look at the LFO first. So the LFO is already set up and running, so we can just... That's pretty straightforward. We can change the rate. And we've got a few different waveforms. So we've got square wave, which is just going to turn it effectively on and off, and also random, which is quite nice. There's some bit of useful interest to be had in there. So that's reasonable. Envelope, again, flexibly, we can go from envelope 1 or envelope 2, positive or negative, and put dynamics in. So this is much the same as you've already seen for the mixer and for the pitch envelope. So we'll just put it on envelope 1 for the moment. And you can hear that fading in. We can make it a bit more extreme. And bring it back down. So that will go up slowly and down slowly. And there it comes back down. Yeah, so it's reasonable and workmanlike. This is a good synth to start programming on. It's the one that I actually used in my book to replace the sadly missed CM101, because that's not available in 64-bit or cross-platform. But this works well enough. Finally, we've got key follow, which keeps the filter frequency consistent with notes that you play. So there, if I change, you can see the boost is changing from here to here as I play. If I turn key follow off, it's staying wherever it is and not moving around. So in fact, we can just put that there. And then you can see when I play a different note, we're not getting that boosted. So generally, if you want it to sound musical and be consistent, key follow is what you want. And it's nice to have variable key follow rather than just a switch. The VCA section is pretty self-explanatory. We've got a level control and we've got a mode, whether it follows envelope 2 or gate. So if you've decided you want to use envelope 1 for this and envelope 2 for this, you can just have the amplifier just switching on and off. So this just gives you on and off gate, whereas if we put it on envelope 2, we'll see we can make this fade in terms of amplitude, etc. So it's nice to have a bit of extra flexibility in there. And down the bottom row, we've got what we've already seen. So our LFO, which is pretty standard with a bit of delay time on there, which is nice. So if we're going to put it, let's just put it on pitch here and then put in a bit of delay before it comes in. So you can hear we've just got a bit of time before it takes over. So that's useful. We've got rate and also mod wheel. This allows the mod wheel to control how much the LFO is changing the pitch of the oscillators. If we bring that down here, we can see that the mod wheel is doing a lot. I've turned the mod wheel all the way up and we're getting that LFO coming over. If I bring that all the way down, play a key and move my mod wheel up, we get nothing. So this is the mod wheel intensity control. So we can just turn that up. You get a bit of mod wheel control in there. So that gives you a bit of extra control, which again is always nice to have. So the envelope section here, we've got standard ADSR, but we've got key follow as well, which is a little bit unusual, and typically that will be off, but this allows you to make it so that the envelope runs faster at higher pitches. So here the envelope will be faster for a higher pitch. There it would be static regardless of whatever pitch you're playing. Envelope 2 is exactly the same, as is the want of 80s Roland synths. We've got the inbuilt chorus. So if we play this note here and put the chorus on, you can hear the effect of that. Massive difference, really fattening things up. And mode 2 goes even further. Now, the original physical JX-8p had Aftertouch on the keyboard, and typically that stopped working after a while because it relied on conductive strips under the keyboard, which got a bit corroded and then stopped working. And the old trick used to be take your keyboard apart and basically clean it up with a pencil eraser, which I did to my JX-8p, and amazingly then got Aftertouch. But it was always a bit heavy. You had to really squeeze on the keyboard to get it to work. But nicely, this allows that to be implemented, as we'll see now. So the Aftertouch here works in a way more like the Super JX, which I think was the JX10, allowing vibrato, brilliance, and volume to be controlled. And this plugin actually responds to both channel pressure, which is channel-based Aftertouch, which often people call Aftertouch, and polyphonic Aftertouch, which is per note, which is a much more complicated thing, and not many keyboards provide that. But it allows you to control vibrato, brilliance, or volume when your keyboard sends that. Now, I don't have a keyboard which will send Aftertouch, but what I'm going to do is just program some in. So let's just take a look at how you would do that if you wanted to do it. So we'll just create a part which is a couple of bars long. Open it up in the editor. So let's do that, drawing in that Aftertouch data. And now reopen the PG-8X. So we should get vibrato as we play this. Yeah, that certainly worked. So now let's take a quick look at how you would create polyphonic Aftertouch, which is a bit confusing because Cubase refers to channel pressure as Aftertouch. I'm pretty sure that the MIDI implementation calls it channel pressure, and polyphonic Aftertouch refers to polyphonic Aftertouch, where you pick an individual note. So just going to delete this original data here. Now, for the sake of it, what we're going to do is create a note first to allow that to be applied. So I'm just going to create a C here. And then when I change to poly pressure and click the note, we see now we're creating poly pressure for that specific note. So now I'm going to draw that in. So that means that the poly pressure will apply for that note, but for the other note, so I'm then going to draw in a G. Just going to quantize both of those. And then you can see that the poly pressure for G4, there isn't any. So there's only for the C. So now if we go back to the PG-8X and play this back, we should hopefully hear that the C will get vibrato added to it and the G won't. So let's just try that. Yeah, so you can hear that pretty clearly. Let's just try that instead, interpreting that as volume. So again, go back to left locator and play that back. And the same would apply for brilliance as well. So let's see if that works. Maybe slightly less noticeably there, but I think that's there. So if you've seen the note expression video, you'll realize that this is looking a bit familiar, and that's because the creators of MIDI did actually think about this kind of control method. It's certainly not as flexible as note expression, and it doesn't give you the ability to do multiple parameters, but with a synth like this, it shows that it was something that was thought about, the ability to change notes individually, even though they're on the same MIDI channel. It's not something you use a great deal, but being able to access it here is another strength, and also being aware of it, because there are other synths which make use of this kind of thing. So pitch bend range is pretty straightforward. It starts out at 2 and goes up to 7. That's fairly straightforward. And then we've got Portamento, so sliding between notes. 10 is a long time. But it's not fingered Portamento, it's either on or off in this case. So the key mode section that you see at the top left of the screen allows the changing of the mode of the synth from poly, unison and mono, and also offers some variations. So there's poly 1 in red and poly 2 in yellow mode, which allocate the voices slightly differently and can allow you to manipulate that slightly. So one of them is round robin, so yellow is round robin and red is normal mode. And generally you'll only hear the difference in this with sounds which have got long releases where you get voice stealing, etc. Unison mode allows you to stack oscillators. So in unison 1, each note is 2 voices, so you can hear that doubling up, whereas in poly mode, so we've got that there. And in yellow unison 2 mode, we get it with an octave below. So that's like instant fatness. So if you want to fatten up your sound, rather than playing around with the tuning here, just go to unison 2 mode and you'll be in business. Mono 1 is standard mono voice mode. And mono 2 is like unison mono mode. So that's an interesting variation there. And it just allows you to change those sounds a little more than the controls would otherwise allow you. Now, the settings section here is triggered by pressing the settings button down at the bottom right of the PG-8X and gives us a few useful things. Firstly is unison detune, so we're still in mono unison mode, and the amount of detuning you can control here, so you can go to none, which gives you compared to, so you can hear that you get some phasing between them in mode 2, and then detune them, etc. Octave stretch is quite nice. So this effectively retunes the keyboard slightly. So I'm going to put it into standard mono mode so we don't get any detuning. And if I play 2 octaves apart on my keyboard, if I stretch the octave more, you can hear that top note is sharp. If I bring it down, so it's effectively doing what some piano tuners, where they make it maybe not so much of exactly an octave for each octave you play on the keyboard or not. So it's another useful part of being able to change this. And filter noise. So this just passes some noise into the filter, which can give you a slightly more attacking filter sound. So you can see it. If I bring this in, you can see all this noise happening at a low level. Not sure you hear that on every sound. Occasionally I found a couple of sounds where you can really hear that. Okay, so the mono retrigger control. I was expecting this to allow retriggering of envelopes or not, but I can't get it to work. So I'm just going to leave that one. LFO sync, this is quite nice because it allows you to change the LFO to be synced from the host application. So if you turn this on, you see now when you change the rate, you see that it's changing in musical values. So if you look here, as I change the rate control, you see you're getting some musical control with all those possibilities from a 30-second all the way down to 2 bars worth. So that's pretty useful, syncing that up. Auto write, so this automatically writes presets, and you've already seen how the presets work. Generally, I'd leave that turned off. Global gain, if you're finding the level coming out is too low or too high, you can trim it there. So I didn't get much sense out of the LFO trigger. I had expected this to be a way of linking it to the host application in terms of the link between host tempo and the LFO, but I couldn't find any particular rhyme or reason to that. But one thing that does work is number of voices. So you can easily run out in unison mode if you're playing sort of multiple notes, etc. But having them all available here up to 12 is quite nice, particularly in unison 2 mode. So we can have loads of voices playing or loads of them playing in mono mode as well. So that's quite useful. And we've just got controls for the chorus, including noise, which if you ever used a real JX-8p, you'll know that the chorus was pretty noisy. MIDI settings, fairly straightforward. So we've got 16 channels. It defaults to all. In probably most modern settings, you're going to just stick to all. Unless you're using an unusual live performance setup, etc., then most of the time you're going to be using this in an instrument channel, and just keep it on all will be fine. And sending Sysex for parameters and programs. You'd probably only want this if you were going to try and use this as a controller for a real JX-8p, which I understand you can do, but I don't have one handy, so I won't be able to do that. As with most VST synthesizers, it's possible to control the controls on screen using a hardware controller, etc., that sends out MIDI data. The PG-8X is no exception. It's pretty easy to set up, so let's just have a look at how you do it here. So here we have 2 controls, which I want to control with my MIDI controller. So first one's DCO1. So to MIDI learn this, you look simply right-click, 2-finger tap, and then move the control in question. So here it's this. And notice that you can control the minimum and maximum value. So let's say I wanted to limit that to 8. I'd just bring that down to 8. And then even though I turn my controller all the way around, it just scales it to 8, which is nice. Once you're done with this, click Write Values. Okay, so click that, and that stores that. So now that will just work there. If you now want to do DCO2, repeat the process. So just again, I've 2-finger tapped and then move the control. And again, I'm now going to do Write Values. That closes that. And now these two work independently. It's really important that you press Write Values, because otherwise you'll get this controller would end up controlling both of these. It can get in all sorts of messes, but you can control these really nicely. So if I want to clear those, I can do just by summoning that by right-clicking and resetting all. It's apparently possible to reset selected, but I've not had that much success with it, but there we go. So there you go, the PG-8X, which is a reasonable emulation of the Roland JX-8p with a few extras thrown in for good measure. One of the best things about it is that it has controls that you can grab on screen and manipulate, much easier than using the menu-based system, although of course there was the Roland PG-800 programmer, which was available at significant extra cost to allow you to manipulate those controls rather than having to access them via a menu. As ever, with all these synths, I think it's worth spending a bit of time with it, trying to find some sounds in there which you might use. If there's only one sound in there that you use and it starts a song for you, I think it's probably been worth its while. But you may find that some of them become staples, maybe not at the foreground of your production, but providing some sort of ensemble performance. As ever, I hope you found this video useful, and if you have, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you again soon for more Music Tech Tuition.